We're very lucky today to have Calvin Murray with us, a senior threat research analyst from Webroot. He's been with Webroot over 10 years now. So he's just going to go through emerging cyber threats within the market and what to be looking out for in 2021. So it won't be death by PowerPoint or just talking about Webroot. We'll be more talking about the cyber threats that are facing our customers and ourselves. So Calvin, if you'd like to fire away.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, yeah, as said, I'm been working with Webroot now over 10 years. We've seen a lot of changes in that time, but none so much in 2020 and 2021. No doubt, as the trends will continue, we're going to see an expanse in cybercrime, and we're going to see an expanse in the kind of innovation of cyber criminals. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the vectors, what we would call the soft targets. The first one I'll go into in a little bit of detail that we see being hit all the time is health. And a lot of these targets would have a lot in common. We see, of course, hospitals, large and small, being targeted. GPs are very easy to target. Really, when you think about a GP's office, it wouldn't have much organization, etc. We see health facilities being targeted because of their research. And we also see clinics as well being targeted. Government is, we've seen high profile attacks, maybe on Parliament, on heads of Parliament, even on election campaigns, etc. But we also see smaller parts of government, like local government, like the police, especially the police in the US over the last 2 years, and ancillary state bodies, the huge, messy kind of machinery of the state. So where you get your driver's license, etc., etc. SMBs are the largest money maker of them all. When we talk about any of these vectors that we see here, they will never make the headlines, SMBs, but they are making the most amount of money for cyber criminals at the moment. And they're the vast bulk of targets. You take health, you take government, education, everything that you see on the news, nothing compares to the amount of that SMBs take up. One thing I've been looking into a lot this year, as far as vectors go, will be education. So we've seen a lot of teachers moving to just sitting in their classrooms, teaching with chalk, teaching with markers, and now having to go on different platforms like Zoom, etc. And these platforms are fantastic and they're helping people teach. But we've a whole bunch of school principals, teachers, etc., just suddenly being thrown into this online world and being thrown into this world where they're sharing data online and sharing privacy and being entrusted with the privacy of children and the privacy of teachers, etc., and the privacy of maybe third level students. So education is a massive headline, a breakout headline that we've seen this year as far as cybercrime goes. And transport. One thing a lot of these targets here have in common: health, government, education, and transport, and some SMBs as well. They provide essential services. So if you manage to cripple a health service, or you manage to cripple government, or you manage to maybe delay a flight even by 5 minutes, that is going to cost hundreds of millions, or it might even cost lives. And there's been a lot of debate over whether a ransomware attack has actually directly led to somebody's death within a half an hour on a German hospital there a few months ago. Education as well. It's no coincidence that we hear reports of cyber criminals targeting educational facilities just before exams come out. And when you have that leverage, when you have that such an essential service, if you ask a company to give them some money, they can pay and get their services back up and running. We talked about SMBs and why SMBs are the biggest target of them all. And here's just some of the reasons that you should think about. We all know running an SMB is tough. Employees in smaller businesses often have to do different jobs and wouldn't have a huge department of skilled staff making 10-year plans, for instance. They often operate on the seat of their pants, and employing full-time security staff or even full-time IT staff is not an option. So we see some of the points here. We've got finer margins, less robust security practices, less likely to have insurance. If they do have insurance, is it cyber insurance? Less likely to have any security personnel, or absorb sudden shocks and losses. So we saw an aluminium producer getting hit with ransomware that it cost the aluminium producer many billions. You know, if that happens, even the loss of a few thousand or the loss of 100,000 to a small to medium business could completely put the business, and this is the type of thing that happens all the time. They're just put completely out. Police press don't care so much about the little guy. That's not to really have a go against the police, but when we've seen headlines this year about ransomware costing, or data theft, I should say, costing a famous insurance company hundreds of millions. So it's all the customer's data being stolen. If you go up to the police and you say, I've just lost 100 grand to cyber criminals, or even $1 million to cyber criminals, and meanwhile that week they have a business that's just lost 100 million, you can't really blame the police in kind of looking after maybe a bigger company that has a lot more of its customers kind of put out. The fact of the matter is, like in most of the people trying to deal with cybercrime, police are just don't have the resources. UK are a lot better than my country in Ireland, but yeah, I would say this is true for everywhere across the world. We're really lagging behind when it comes to catching up with these guys. And of course, businesses, small to medium businesses, are more likely to have single points of failure. So if you cripple one server or even knock out one machine, that can be everything. So I guess the main headline is the increasing use of automation by criminals is really accelerating attacks on small to medium businesses. They don't have to sit there and do all of the hacking and pick on one company. A lot of this is done automatically for them. And SMEs are usually not as prepared to defend, plan, suffer, or remediate these attacks when compared to their larger counterparts. So with all of these things, I don't really want anybody to take any notes or to try and learn something up by rote. This is just to give you a feel of the type of attacks out there at the moment, and maybe to give you a new perspective on how you think about this. I'm going to talk a bit about health and why healthcare is getting attacked. But we could talk, we could talk for hours about education and transport. The same problems here about health and the same questions we're asking. You should be asking about any business that you're dealing with at the moment. I will say as well, speaking of questions, if anybody has any questions at all, get them into us. We will leave time for a Q&A. I might be able to get to the questions during, but if not, we'll definitely be able to get to them later on. Okay, so why would you want to attack a hospital? Why would you want to attack a healthcare facility? Medical data is worth a lot. One study from Fish Labs said that healthcare related credentials and healthcare, like medical records, are worth 10 times the worth of stolen credit cards on the dark web. And that might sound a bit bananas, but you can replace a credit card and you can't replace an identity. It's that simple. So anything you can use for identity theft, policy numbers, medical history, billing details, family details, etc. As well as identity theft, there's a big, huge ring when it comes to insurance fraud. If you can pretend to be somebody else, you can milk health insurance. You can order drugs online if prohibited drugs. If you manage to forge certain things, maybe forge something from a doctor's perspective or forge something from a criminal's perspective. And of course, if you have any of this stuff, it doesn't matter which industry you're in, if you manage to steal people's names, billing details, you can use these to phish and to attack other companies. Hospitals have a problem in that they have a huge attack surface. So yeah, the average hospital room has so many devices in it. They're really, really large organizations. My local hospital has like 3,000 people in it, all kinds of different people milling around in them, all kinds of different like buildings in them. I'm sure the IT teams, it's hard to know just even how many computers they have or like what computers they have, never mind going around and trying to secure all of these things. We've got ancient technology lying there. If you've got an old PC, if you have a PC at the moment running Windows 7, that is basically has zero protection on it. There was a study done of Irish healthcare recently, and a lot of them are still using Windows XP. And I don't know what's less than zero, but Windows 7 was only discontinued like last year, but that is like maybe 3 times as dangerous running one of those machines as running a modern Windows 10 machine. You have specialist machines lying around, PCs, servers, data management, and a big thing to hit. As well as we look at something like health, and then we look at something like government. They're disjointed organizations. If you have a nice organization where everybody knows their job, and it's the IT department, they're well in control and they know exactly who's working for them, that's the perfect from a security standpoint. Well, I suppose perfect from any kind of organizational standpoint. But most healthcare is the opposite. It's complex, chaotic places, separate organizations within. Everybody has a blame game. They're blaming each other on who's responsible for things. And then you've got something like, our health service or the NHS above everything else. And you've got data sharing between hospitals. So there's a lot of ways to target them. When you, as we talked about, when you have something like a hospital, you've got essential services. If you hit a hospital, it might cost people's lives. So ransomware, of course, is really, really important. But there's other reasons from a criminal perspective. But there's other reasons as well. If you're stealing research, you might have valuable research that's being done in the hospitals. And then there's political reasons as well. So when you look at the headlines of things that are hitting healthcare, ransomware is obviously one of the big ones there. As we talked about in September, there's a lot of debate over whether that led to a death. A guy had to be shipped from one hospital to another. The jury's kind of out on that, but I don't see why people should say there's a smoking gun, a death has happened. If you completely shut down all the machines in the hospital, it's going to lead to somebody losing their life in one way or another, whether it leads it in 30 minutes, if it happens in, should that be considered murder, etc. I think it's really a moot point. And from a moral perspective, I don't think there's any difference. Okay, so speaking of ransomware attacks that we'd see on these organizations, I want to talk about ransomware in general. When we do straw polls of people that I do webinars for and people that I talk to, ransomware is the one thing that keeps admins up at night. And that's with very good reason. It's been easily the #1 kind of threat that we've seen in the last decade. And it's only getting bigger. 2020 was a completely breakout year for ransomware, as we're going to see. So there's all kinds of technical stuff that criminals will do, but what's the top-down, high-level kind of strategies that they have? As we mentioned, attack the usual weak targets. A breakout thing that we've seen in 2020 and 2019, the end of 2019, is what we would call big game hunting. So specialized kind of elite hacking and criminals going after, like I talked about, banks, going after heavy industry, going after Foxconn, as we see there. Foxconn are, their subsidiaries include Sharp, Inalux, Belkin, and you're talking about a company that's worth trillions. So the type of people that hacked Foxconn just in early December, just in early this month, they would have been stalking this company for a very long time. They would have hacked this company. They would have maneuvered themselves to control all the machines. They managed to delete, they managed to encrypt data on 1,200 to 1,400 servers, and they managed to just delete completely maliciously about 30 terabytes of data. So this is something that we're seeing. The targeted attacks is something that we've seen on SMBs for the last 5 years or so, a rise in targeted attacks, not just hitting companies randomly, I guess, but we're also seeing it on bigger targets now as well. And that is including military bases, it's including police, it's including governments in the US. So this type of thing where people are taking their time, stalking a company or an organization, bringing them to their knees, that leads to sky-high ransoms. At the start of this year, ransoms were 90 grand in US dollars. Now, I checked it about a week ago, it was 233K. That's the average ransom that's being paid to ransomware gangs at the moment. And the top, I wrote down the top is 34 million. I think that's a stat. That's only the one that I've seen. I think we're into the hundreds of millions, really. Oh, you might be wondering where we get this data from. We get it from a company called Coveware. They do reports all of the time. So Coveware, an interesting company in that when you get hit with a ransomware gang, you talk to Coveware. Then what Coveware do is they talk to the criminals for you and they help you negotiate with the criminals. It might seem like a crazy company, but the fact that these guys popped up a few years ago and are now thriving, that should tell you all you need to know. And when you get hit, 99% of the times, if you get hit with ransomware, there's no way to decrypt it. It's just too easy to get your hands on really good ransomware that's bulletproof at the moment. As well as big game hunting, we're seeing ransomware as a service continue to just flourish as a, I don't know what to call them, vectors as an industry. So ransomware as a service, not everybody is really, not everybody is a coder, and not everybody knows how to charge people's ransoms. Not everybody knows how to write ransom notes. What you can do if you're a lower level criminal, you can go on, and we'll talk about some of these gangs. You can go online, you can rent ransomware off these guys, you can attack all the businesses that you like, and then when the time comes for that business to pay, it gives it a cutback to the bigger criminal. So the bigger criminal gets between 10 and 20%. And that really privatizes the whole industry. Ransomware as a service, we're seeing this as like hacking as a service. We're seeing this as phishing as a service. We're seeing this as email spam as a service. You don't need to know anything about crime to get into cybercrime. Any idiot can just go onto the dark web, can rent these services, and can get involved. And that to me is kind of the scarier part, rather than thinking that everything is run by geniuses. A big breakout trend for 2020 is data theft as well as ransoms, which is something we're going to talk about now. And of course, this year we've seen COVID and other hot button headlines being used to attack people. All right, so just a bit of a case study. There is, as we'll talk about in the next slide, there is a huge amount of ransomware malware out there, huge amount of gangs out there. But we'll just talk about these guys to give you an idea how one of these gangs will operate. Sondino Kibi, better known as Revil, have been crippling companies with their ransomware. And this is ransomware as a service, as we talked about. You can go on the dark web, you can download Revil, you can send an email off to a company or hack a company, and then just write your own little ransom note. You can go onto the website and you can configure all of the services that you want in it. So in a way that we can go online and we can, like, none of us know anything about email or you know how a word processor works. You can go online, you can get all these things as a service. You can go online and get this as a service. The gangs that use this, and a lot of good ransomware gangs at the moment that use good in inverted commas, also use data theft extortion. So they'll steal your company data, or they'll steal your data related to celebrities or whatever. And as well, they'll steal that data, they'll encrypt the data that you have. And then they have two items of leverage there. So even if you stick your fingers up to the criminals and you say, I'm going to restore from backup, they might have exfiltrated the data as well and stolen your data. And this is particularly used in Europe, this gang. Because it's ransomware as a service, it's used by big game hunters. I think the gang that are kind of behind Revil are behind those attacks. And because these top criminals are hitting companies there for hitting companies, let's say, for 10 million, lower level criminals see that, and they see all of this noise that these criminals make because they boast about all of these attacks that they do. And lower level criminals would see these big attacks and then take it and try to attack smaller companies. So yeah, these guys kind of, the ones that run it kind of operate in a catwalk, and everybody else kind of copies it. Most attacks here are launched script-based, which is something we can talk about a little bit. So these names are from ID Ransomware, and that's an excellent site used by researchers such as myself. This time 3 years ago, there were about 300 names on it. And as of now, I think there's about 960 names in it. I'm not going to count them. And yeah, as that was just as of today, it's probably gone up since I copied these in. The simple fact is there's a crazy amount of money being made in ransomware at the moment, and it's really, really driving criminal innovation. When we talk about these targeted attacks on businesses, RDP is a big part of it. So criminals seeking out remote desktop connections that aren't secured. And if I could give one piece of advice to admins, please secure RDP. And yeah, if I could take one thing from this presentation, please secure RDP. With COVID, with people work from home, we have more admins sitting at home on their couches, connected to servers, etc. And we actually see, when we look at sites like Showdown, where you can scan for unsecured connections, that the amount of unsecured RDP connections is actually going up. And you can, as with everything, you can go onto the dark web, even if you don't know how to hack RDP, which is fairly simple. You can go onto the dark web and you can buy access to machines that are already hacked. And in the time this year when we've seen everybody work from home, we've seen COVID, we've seen the price of RDP connections that are hacked gone down already. Just the price of a cup of coffee. I was only looking on the dark web there yesterday. About $4 is what you're talking about to access a hacked machine. Another gang we'll talk about is Maze. These guys in 2020 have grabbed really all of the headlines. They're what's called a big game hunter. So they go after the big guys. So when they ask for a ransom, they're not asking for $50, as used to be the case. They're not asking for 100,000 or, you know, the average ransom of 2-3K. You're talking millions. You're talking tens of millions. You're talking hundreds of millions. And they are like the best of the best in what they do. Of course, being a really good ransomware gang at the moment, they threaten to publish your data. As you can see there, they hit Canon in August. They really did Canon bad, took down loads of their websites, but they've been hitting everybody across the world. There's tons of incredible attacks they've done. And then they taunt the people that they've hit. So they do this when they publish their data. They'll threaten to do it from non-dark sites that anybody can access. And then all of the data from the company that they've managed to get will be published up there. If the company don't pay, they might do 10% of the data, leak that up and leave all the juicy stuff. So just really extort the company that way. Maze are so good, and they have access to hacking so many people that they run a cartel, it's being called, but I guess it's more of an affiliate program. You can go on, you can pay them some money. Well, you can give them a percentage. They will give you access to their award-winning malware. They will give you a bunch of targets that you can hit, give you a lot of advice on how you can hit them and some shared kind of attack info. And then you can go off, attack those targets and give your 10 or 20% to Maze. So yeah, Maze just don't have the time to really go after all the targets that they could. Because they're very public facing and PR savvy, they crack a lot of jokes when they're boasting about attacking their victims. They use a lot of memes. When they hit a hospital there during the year in a really horrible case, they claimed that it wasn't them or they didn't mean to do it. So they claim to have a conscience, but I think that's more of a product of having a PR, being PR facing as opposed to the actual reality of it. So we don't have to go into any great details of what's happening here. From the malware side of things, from the programming side of things, there's a lot of technical innovation, of course, as well. Deleting shadow copies, so last known good configuration, all of that stuff. Process whitelisting, not attacking, and sandbox evasion, not attacking if they know they're being monitored. Region whitelisting, if it's in a certain company, they don't like to crap on their own doorstep. If it's in a certain country, they mightn't run, which is something we see with most of the ransomware out there. That's something, another thing, story for another day. Machine whitelisting, you don't want to encrypt the same machine twice. Sometimes you will get automatic wealth reporting from the company being sent back. The big breakout thing we've seen in 2020 is multi-thread encryption. So as well as using multiple processes, use multiple threads to encrypt. And this has brought the encryption time down. Sometimes encryption maybe would have taken an hour to do, and now it can be done in minutes of massive amounts of data. Document renaming makes it tricky, as well as wiping of unused space to recover from backup extractor. And yeah, we're seeing for the future, we're going to see more things like all script ransomware playing a big part. I won't go into too much detail with that. All right, so as well as encrypting data, stealing data, as we talked about, is a big deal. And it really takes up one of the main pillars of cybercrime. Very quickly, why would you want to do that? Well, fast cash makes sense. Banking Trojans can steal credit cards, bitcoins, etc. But most criminals, when they're stealing these type of things, would steal things by the thousands. There's no point sifting through thousands of credit cards trying to buy stuff on eBay. You sell those credit cards on the dark web, fence them off to somebody else, and let them do all of that dodgy fraud. Of course, personal information, as we talked about, can be traded or used for identity theft or extortion. Espionage is something that makes it press all of the time. And another reason to steal data that people tend not to think about as much is when data is stolen as a means to attack. So as well as you can steal like gold out of a jeweler's, but you can also steal a blueprint to a jeweler's as well. So that's one way to think about it. And we have a lot of amazing stuff like Emote I'm going to talk about. That's reconnaissance malware and stuff that goes around just casing the joint, I guess you could say. When we talk about malware, there's never been a bigger malware operation than Emote, and it's just growing like more and more every day. It's an absolutely gigantic empire. I guess you could say it's a piece of malware, but it's also a botnet or a collection of infected machines, and it's also a criminal empire as well. Emote started off in 2013 just as a regular banking Trojan that stole banking stuff, but it became so much bigger since then. Once it gets onto a machine, it spreads to as many machines as it can, often using stolen credentials, and then it drops the payload, then the real damage happens. So with the payload it drops is possibly a banking Trojan or ransomware, or as we're going to see in some cases, both. Emote is frightening in that it's constantly undergoing technical innovation. Researchers saw it stealing millions of emails, and they were kind of wondering why it would just steal the whole emails, but Emote, like the makers behind it, were crunching all these emails with machine learning to learn how to kind of automatically write more convincing phishing emails. So these guys are at the absolute pinnacle of technical sophistication. As with most things, the way that Emote arrives in a business is by email. Macros is possibly one of the things, but also many exploits could be used. You get a loaded Office document, you click on the wrong thing, it can happen to anybody, and then the scripts are run, and then the scripts themselves will download exes. We tend to call Emote and infections like them modular malware, and another way to think of it is Swiss Army knife malware. Emote is amazing, but it's really there as a delivery method, and it can be configured to drop anything onto a machine. One of the big things that it drops, we talk about data theft, is Trickbot. And Trickbot is a top banking Trojan used by top criminals. These guys have police paid off, they have banks in their pockets, they have loads of a network of human money mules everywhere. And once it's onto a machine, it steals all of those 4 different types of data that we talked about from a machine. Now, in the last 2 years, what we've seen is Trickbot dropping other infections as well. So it will drop our friend Ryuk onto your machine we talked about earlier, and BitPaymer and infections like that. So the order of events here is kind of important. This is really a nightmare scenario that happens, it happens every second to business out there, but there's an order of events here, and it kind of makes sense. You get Emote spreading to every machine on the network. Emote drops Trickbot to every machine. Trickbot steals the data or the money, or both in reality. And then it drops the horrible ransomware onto the machine, which encrypts every machine share drive that it can. And then the stolen data is used to by the Trickbot authors to compromise more businesses, in a month's time, or even compromise the same business again. So these criminals have it figured out. You're going to steal data first and then encrypt. If you were to encrypt the machines first, you wouldn't be able to steal the data from them. So the order of events here is quite important, as we've got 1, 2, and 3. All right. So the last main thing that we'll talk about as far as threats go is business email compromise attacks. And these are absolutely exploded in 2020 and in 2019 as well. You might see a trend that I'm talking about. I'm talking about ransomware has exploded, data theft has exploded, business email compromise has exploded. The fact of the matter is, just this sector has exploded in general. The amount of businesses and the amount of people getting online, the amount of people doing business online, that's growing. And even faster than that, cyber criminality is growing. So the amount of money in this sector is just on an exponential rise at the moment. And there's really not enough criminals out there. I hate to use these terms. There's not enough criminals out there to scoop up all of this money at the moment that's out there. So BEC stands for Business Email Compromise. And you probably know exactly what this time the scam is, even if you didn't hear of the name or the acronym. This is when somebody in your organization receives a fraudulent email where they're persuaded to give up something valuable. The person usually works in your finance team, and what they give up is usually company money. So these type of things is nothing new. Somebody pretending to be somebody else and asking for money. But there's a lot of kind of modern tricks that can be used to fool companies. The FBI's, that was actually a little bit outdated. That was from the start of this year to the start of 2019. They said that damages were up 100%. That's just continued on since then. That kind of trajectory in BEC money being taken. Kind of skim over a case study here of what the type of thing that can happen. This is a case from the University of California in San Diego. The college received an email from a fraudulent Dell email account instructing UCSD to redirect payments meant for Dell equipment and services to this guy, Amil Hassan Raj, to his Wells Fargo bank account in Minnesota. So the college, and this has happened to a lot of UK colleges as well in the last year, the college followed the instructions and redirected payment. And of course, this originated from one of his co-conspirators in Kenya. And when that money was like 750 grand was sent in 28 payments. So as you can imagine, a college would have a lot of Dell equipment constantly asking for new monitors, etc., etc. And you could see how they'd run up a 750K bill. Also, unbeknownst to Pennsylvania University in the same year, they sent 120K or a little over that to the same guy's bank account before this university was stopped and froze payments. And then when they were alerted, the fraud was alerted, the police found out about the university as well after the Pennsylvania University found out about UCSD. So this guy was extradited in mid last year back to the United States, and he faced prosecution, and he actually got prosecuted this year and convicted this year, I should say. So this is such a typical case. It's happening to everybody out there at the moment. It's a very, very easy way to make money if you think about it. The only thing that's strange about this case is that these criminals actually faced any kind of justice. So like I talked about, if you're a big hospital or if you're a big college and you've got $1 million or you've got 10 million, or in the case of Google and a bunch of other people, they got hit with 120 million in a BEC scam not so long ago. If those guys come to you, they're working on those things, chances are, from a small to medium business perspective, you're not going to be top of the pile when it comes to police looking at these, unfortunately. And there's just too much of it going on for police to kind of keep up with it. So don't just believe us on our word for it. We've seen the same things being repeated by AIG. We've seen the same things being repeated by FBI. And this year we saw a report by Agari as well, saying that just in Q2, they were up 50% or almost 50%. What we're talking about on the average, I've seen averages, Agari say there that the average is $80,000. I've seen 100, I've seen 150. You're kind of talking in the same ballpark. Maybe about half of what a ransomware attack could cost you, but this is the kind of figures that you're talking about when you get hit with one of these schemes. All right, and as an addendum, I guess on threats, I'll talk just a little bit about miners. Something that I thought I'd never have to talk about again, but something that is really beginning to spike this year, and something to look forward to or not in 2021. So Webroot had a threat report, as we do each year in 2018, and we said that our number one threat was crypto miners. For those of you that don't know, when you're mining with a cryptocurrency, you're trying to mine Bitcoin, you're putting your computer to doing lots of maths problems, you're working your processor, and you're helping to crunch data for the cryptocurrency. When you crunch this data, when you mine these coins, you get rewarded with coins, so you get rewarded with money. When people started doing this, they started doing it with just normal PCs, but then more and more people got involved, and they realized money was to be made in it. And now you have giant firms, giant warehouses of people crypto mining. So things reached fever pitch in 2018. And that was related to the cost really of the amount of rewards that were being paid out. If you're doing this at home and your PC is working overdrive and it's working all throughout the night, it's going to heat up your room. It's going to wreck your PC. It's going to use up a lot of your power. But of course, criminals figured out that you can use someone else's PC to do it. So you can affect somebody with malware that will do the mining in the background while they're not aware of it. Or you can run cryptojacking scripts from websites. So somebody visits a website, their PC starts working overdrive, and it's mining little bits of cryptocurrency for people in the background. So it was the biggest threat that we saw at the time. But then we saw a decrease. We did a report on this. You can see there the cost of Monero, which is kind of similar to a similar price to Bitcoin, went through the floor in 2018. But the amount of PE files that we saw as well, the amount of cryptojacking websites that we saw also dropped at the exact same time. So it kind of makes sense. Cyber criminals are so responsive. As soon as this game kind of was gone, they just decided not to get involved with it anymore. And they decided, why don't we just do ransomware as a service or something like that instead? So yeah, we didn't hear anything about mining for a long time because just the rewards really weren't good enough for the criminals. But 2020, as if it wasn't bad enough, we saw the return of old school worm infections like WannaMine returned in January. And it really actually, looking at my Twitter feed and looking at the return of miners, that's how I realized that the price of Monero and the price of Bitcoin, you can see a recent graph there, Monero. Bitcoin's a favorite of cyber criminals. Bitcoin's actually reached the same height that it was in 2018, which is crazy because it was such a huge crash in that time. So yeah, we've seen Crypto Cybel, we've seen DexFot, we've seen Lemon Duck as well. You can see there many people have reported on it. And our own advanced malware removal team have done some internal reporting on one that they've dubbed Blue Mockingbird. So you can use something like XMRig that's an open source miner out there. You can bake this into your own malware, whether you're running a big malware import like Emote, whether you're hacking companies, whether you're sending out emails to people. Miners is something that we're going to see in 2021, and we've seen in 2020 a lot more. I guess the one thing about miners, when we do these straw polls with people, they tend not to worry people, even when they were absolutely wrecking businesses. They tend not to worry people because they're like, well, I won't notice this. Everybody's going to be annoyed because their machine is slowing down. I'm going to get hit with a bigger power bill later on. But I guess that's what the beauty as criminals, from a criminal standpoint, is in using them. They operate in the background. Nobody notices them working. They just leech money from your power bills and money from you replacing PCs all the time. But it's really not a good way to think about it because, as we talked about, there's a lot of malware at the moment is Swiss Army knife malware. And the fact that you have a miner on your machine means that something like Emote has been on your machine, means that somebody has breached you. And just as we've seen Trickbot dropping different types of infections as well, miners themselves, when they're mining a machine, maybe they find they're not getting too much out of the machine, and then they just drop some ransomware and completely destroy the machine as well. So it's not something that I'd advise that you don't worry about, just because it's kind of more of a slow burning threat out there. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about bolstering security, how you can do that. Please do get your questions in. It's great to see people signing up here. It's great to see so many people tuning in, and it's great to see so many questions being submitted already. Don't worry, I will get to them straight after this. But just before that, we'll talk a little bit about how you can bolster security. I guess the main thing is not to be overwhelmed. There's 101, to put it lightly, different ways that a company can be breached, but you've got to start somewhere. And if you even secure your RDP, that's going to make you 100% more secure than you were yesterday. And so many businesses out there have absolutely rubbish security. If you do something like secure your RDP, you're not going to be low hanging fruit. You're going to be taken out of. Criminals are just as lazy as the rest of us. They're going to just go after the easiest targets first. If you're going to be hit by something like ransomware, you've got to have multiple backups, not just like one backup. I don't know. I guess as a business, you'll know yourself. What would it be like to just only have yesterday's data? What would it be like to only have last week's data? It should be pretty easy to just close your eyes and think how often you need your backups to be done. And we're finding in this day and age with a lot of businesses, multiple backups is really the way to do it. As it was in the 80s, a strong password policy is really, 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 really important. Things like Emote, things like Trickbot, things like dark web trading, they have a lot of breach passwords out there. So you kind of have to assume that somebody already has your password, and that's where multi-factor authentication comes in. Get your two-factor authentication, inquire, ask your AV company, ask your RMMs, ask your MSPs as a business owner how you can do this, how you can get it all done. It was only not so long ago when I did a really good look through all of the passwords that I used and tried to get all of them on multi-factor authentication. It is a bit of a headache, especially when you're doing that on a larger scale. But when we talk about RDP securing yourself 100%, there's another huge jump in security you can take if you can get your password policies. We've seen password cracking coming on leaps and bounds in the last year. Back in the day, it was like like a year or two ago, 8-digit passwords are the things. You're talking 10 or more digits now. And you can use websites like Havent Been Pwned to see if a password is unique or has been breached already. Start at the top is something that I would say and preach as much as I possibly can. When we look at RDP breaches, that's really a breach of an admin. When we look at BEC scams, they are going to be going after the CEO first. So if you manage to crack a CEO's email account and you're sending out messages saying, hey, I've got a friend over here, he's from this country, can you send him an invoice? If you crack an admin bank account or credentials, or if you crack a CEO credentials, they're worth so much more than anyone else in the company. So it stands to reason that if you're going to train your staff, test and train your staff, you've got to start at the top. And I know how tough it is to talk to people on the high ups. I've worked in enough admin teams over the years. They tend to be very busy people and think they know everything. But yeah, and same goes for admins and same goes for security people like myself. We tend to think we know everything, but that's really such a dangerous attitude to have. Disable what you're not using. Updates also they've been important since the 80s, since the 90s, and they've never been more important. So we've seen a lot of web exploits this year, as well as RDP breaches. And this is from people using Citrix and using things that haven't been updated and haven't been updated to the top. Also with RMMs and MSP software, it has to be updated. If you look through any bunch of updates, you can go onto your Microsoft Windows, maybe updates, and have a look through them. Count how many are to do with security. Like you're talking about 80%. Multiple studies have been done. I think I have a slide on this as well about how humans are the weak link always. Any of these things, when you're talking about the most automated of things like Emote, or when you're talking about the most personal of things like BEC, these things usually start with an email, usually start with a phone call, or usually start with somebody clicking something that they haven't. So to train staff is one thing, but to test staff is really, really important. Where we do offer up a product, our security awareness training, and that has phishing kits in it, so you can send off fake emails to your staff. It happens to all of us. It's happened to people working in our teams, and we're supposed to know everything. Yeah, it happens to everybody. It's not something to be embarrassed about. If your IT department catch you out, it's a great time to learn, and it's something that should be celebrated, and there's no shame in it. And it's much better that your IT staff catch you out than your adversaries out there. And get security, get an antivirus. And one thing, no matter what antivirus you're going to pick, try get something to cover the whole environment. There's nothing worse. When I was working on our advanced malware removal teams, we get connected to somebody who's had a crisis, and he's got one warehouse that has one AV and one warehouse that's another. Try to get an AV that covers a whole environment. It'll make our jobs or the jobs of our advanced malware removal teams so much easier. And one thing that Webroot preach, but we're not the only guys that preach out there, is to have a multi-layered approach. So if one of your layers offers 90% protection, it mightn't seem like it's that great. Or even if it offers 50% protection, it mightn't seem like it's that great. But when you multiply these percentages against each other, you really see the chances of threats getting to dropping. So yeah, 0.5 by 0.5 is 0.25. You know, you can multiply the numbers up at those levels. Script shields are really important at the moment. We're seeing most malware is not just exe based. It's always starts with the scripts and then downloads PE files. It's definitely something that we're seeing. And that's just to give you an idea with this multi-layered approach of all of the layers that something can be stopped on. The user clicks on something they're not supposed to, it goes to DNS, maybe it's not caught there, a URL is resolved, maybe the URL, does it get blocked by the URL blocking, does it get blocked by something else, maybe that looks more into the URL, as opposed to just a static list. Then if it runs a web exploit, it gets further than that. Then it will download a script, and then it will download PE files. So if you've got security at all of these layers, and then that's only before the file is executed, there's other layers as well. If you've got security at all these layers, you've just got all of those, you're giving yourself so much more chances to kind of stop these things. Okay, so I'm not quite sure how long I've been talking for. I guess I'm coming up and around to the time now. Thanks a lot for the questions that you've been submitted. And I'm just going to throw it open now if anybody has any questions that they want to show me.
Yeah, we've had a few sent through prior to the webinar, Kelvin.
Okay.
So the first one, why haven't we caught these cyber criminals yet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I was talking about, a lot of ransomware, it has in the code, and I want to give an example of one type of ransomware. If the keyboard on the machine is running from a CIS region, and that's what we would refer to like Russia, Belarus, and that kind of part of the world. If the keyboard is from this country, do not run. So whoever's coded that piece of ransomware doesn't want to anger his local law enforcement. And this is something that we see not just in the case of Russia, but in other countries as well. It's more a case of extradition and a legal thing. With these criminals, we've seen the Pensacola military base in the US getting attacked just after a soldier coincidentally happened to be killed there this year. We've seen the state of Louisiana declaring an emergency because their government has been crippled by ransomware. We've seen all of these major attacks, and I have a feeling that these attackers were not in the US. If they were, I think somebody like the FBI would have been breathing down their neck. I think the attacks on European and US and many businesses across the world, and even hospitals we talked about that could have killed somebody, I think they're getting too big now at the moment. We all know about ransomware and we all know that it's a really big threat, but it's still not something that we see necessarily on the morning news. It's still not something that's part of people's lexicons. I think my prediction for 2021 is that's definitely going to change. You're going to see politicians at the top level speaking about this. There's just too much disruption happening. There's too many businesses being completely ruined, and they're making too much noise. When criminals make too much noise, that's when people start to stand up. So I think you're going to see people at the UN talking about this a lot more than they are. And I think you're going to see maybe some angry words being spoken that police in certain countries need to do more to cooperate with police in other countries as well, and to do extraditions.
That's great. Thanks very much. The next one, are you seeing AI used in attacks?
Yeah, completely. I think people tend to maybe conflate AI and machine learning. As we talked about there, Emote stole a load of emails solely with the purpose of teaching their own phishing and their own spam campaigns how to automatically spit out emails. But also as well, from a kind of a bit of a scary Black Mirror kind of perspective, we have seen artificial intelligence or AI and ML enabled attacks being used in, say, BEC scams. So there was a company, a multinational company, the manager of the the manager of the British warehouse of this company was called by his CEO. The CEO was from Germany, and the voice was perfectly mimicked. And he asked him to send money off to somebody, and then the guy received an email confirming that, and then he sent the money off. And what the crooks had done is they got recordings of the CEO's voice and used artificial intelligence and used clever machines to mimic the voice. So this might seem like really space age tech, but really when you think about WhatsApp and you think about TikTok, and people are modulating their voices and they're changing their faces on the fly, we're definitely going to see this being used. You can use it to mimic how somebody types. You can use it to mimic somebody's mannerisms. You can use it to mimic, just from an identity theft perspective, you can use it to mimic somebody's face, how they speak. So yeah, you're definitely going to see that being used in attacks. But at the moment, it's being used a bit more behind the scenes to make chatbots and to make emails and to make that type of thing better. And if it's being used by normal businesses day to day, you can guarantee it's being used in the criminal sector as well.
Perfect. And the final one that we've had sent in, will we see any additional features coming to the Webroot antivirus side in 2021?
Yeah, 100%. It's very exciting from my point of view, maybe not to anyone else's, but we're going to see a lot of advances on from a threat research point of view. So we have a relatively new shield that's been added for our scripting, our script shield. We had script protection before, but this one is ramped up, and we're integrating that with our threat intelligence network. So we're integrating that with our BrightCloud platform a lot more than it is already. We have an anti-exploit shield as well that's been rolled out, and I'm delighted to see, for people working on the threat team, I'm delighted to see more reporting and more of that being hooked up in a traditional way, that the rest of our threat intelligence is being hooked up. It's one thing to look at a dodgy website or to look at a dodgy script or a dodgy piece of malware, but to look at how all of those things interact is great from a threat intelligence point of view. So from a nerdy point of view, yeah, you're going to see a lot of those. I think there is also more stuff from our Carbonite perspective. And although that's not threat intelligence, it's an important part of security, an important part. So with our integrated platform, with the console that we have, you can log in, you can check on the various products or the various parts of your protection that you have. And the integration with Carbonite and the integration with the backup is going to be interesting to see there. If one of your machines, and God knows it does happen, but if one of your machines gets hit, it's important to be able to, both from a security standpoint and just from getting your business back up and running, it's important to be able to, just from a click of a button, or even from an automated standpoint, get that machine back up and running. So yeah, better integration with Carbonite from this Webroot pane, if you like, that one pane of glass is definitely something that we're going to see.
That's great. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions for Kelvin?
Well, I'd just like to add, if anybody does have any questions, there's my email address there. It's kmurray@webroot.com or kmurray@opentext.com. You can get through to me, no problem there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for your time for today. Please reach out to Phil or Kelvin if you've got any more questions.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for everyone for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.